Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have O'Donnell, grocery prices are up, Trump. No, you're wrong. And that's across was from the economy subreddit, and that looks like someone I guess named O'Donnell interviewing Trump. And yeah, personally, I don't really care how prices are up, but Reddit was always making excuses for when prices were going up under Biden, but when prices go up under Trump, suddenly it's the worst thing ever. And it just goes to show you, just like all the other posts on the subreddit, it's all who's in the in group, who's in the out group, When someone in the in group does something bad, Reddit will always find an excuse. But when someone in the out group does something bad, Reddit will always go after them with the most vigor of anyone. And that just goes to show you, no principles, only teams. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump says SNAP benefits won't go out during shutdown from HuffPost.com, posted by Doctor Who 07. And yeah, personally, I don't think SNAP benefits should be going out. So I think Reddit should like this, but it looks like the guy who posted it said in the comments, POTUS openly saying that he's going to defy a court order. Any other president when we'd see impeachment proceedings this afternoon. And yeah, it's interesting, it just goes to show you Reddit always has to be anti-Trump, even if it's something they like. If it was Joe Biden, if it was a government shutdown under Biden, and Trump was saying, or Biden was saying that, SNAP benefits won't be going out, even if the court says otherwise, Reddit would say, look at that guy standing up to the court system and standing up for poor people. But when Trump does the same thing, Reddit thinks this is literally Hitler going around the court system, even if it's something they like SNAP benefits. And that just goes to show you that, they don't really care for anything other than Orange Man bad. Orange Man could cure cancer, and then Reddit would probably start complaining about overpopulation. And it just goes to show you that, Reddit always has to be against Trump, no matter what the issue is. Next we have Ye Old Trick, and that's a post by Goran Person 777, who it looks like a political cartoon by some guy named Jeff Coates. And it looks like it's Donald Trump, and he's wearing a crown, and he says, "Don't worry, little buddy, we can still hate trans people together." And he's with a billionaire or something, giving a bag of money, and the guy in the MAGA cap is in a hospital gown and an IV, and it says "Bill money" and $4 size on it. And yeah, this is just another Reddit Orange Man bag comic. I would say both parties are very much in the pockets of the rich, but Reddit only seems scared that Orange Man's in the pocket of the rich. They don't care that their side's very much in the pockets of the rich as well. And it just goes to show you that, they don't have any principles other than my side good, your side bad. It's pretty much every Reddit comic every comic share on Reddit is like this. It's Orange Man bad, Republicans bad. And, I don't really care for Orange Man or Republicans, but eventually get tired of the circle jerk. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have The Weekend Was a Crazy Leftist Idea, posted by Ragnar OKXG. And that's a cross post from the Union subreddit, and it looks like a picture. It looks like it has a picture. It says The Weekend Was a Crazy Leftist Idea. In 1886, 7 Union members in Wisconsin died fighting for the 5-day and the 8-hour workday. And then it was linked to a link on. I guess that's where it was posted by More Perfect Union on Facebook. And yeah, of course, Reddit's always going to take the labor argument saying, oh, the labor unions and the labor movement are why concepts like the weekend and the 8-hour workday exist. But, personally, I would say the libertarian perspective is more to argue it from a free market perspective. But workers got more productive, and therefore the market decided to allow for shorter work days and the weekend. And that's very much how the libertarian perspective works. I think the libertarian perspective is, employers shouldn't have to do the weekend or the 8-hour workday if they don't want to. You should be able to work as many hours a week as you want and as many days a week as you want. But, ultimately, people are going to justify what they justify. I think these days, if a company got caught not giving workers the weekend off or working them like 24 hours a day, most people, Reddit would be up in arms about it. So, that's very much how the concept perpetuates itself. If people go against it, then the social media will go after them, and that's very much how things like cancel culture come into being, where if you do something wrong, then you're going to be socially stigmatized. And I think that's, from a libertarian perspective, I personally don't care for cancel culture. I think that's it's very much a libertarian ideal. If you should be able to do whatever you want, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be any social stigma surrounding it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have King Mierda provides proof of his ending 8 wars posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the Political Humor subreddit. It looks like a picture of Trump holding up a piece of paper, and it says, "I kid you not," and it's the post is titled, "Many people are tweeting it," and then it's in the caption says, "I kid you not, this lunatic brought a printout of a tweet to his 60 Minutes interview as proof that he ended 8 wars. We are living in the dumbest timeline imaginable." And yeah, that's very much Donald Trump. He's very much the social media president. He's always very much been the social media president. I don't think we'll ever have a president as much as the social media president as he is, regardless of how much longer social media continues to exist in its current form for. But regardless, it's very much how, people operate these days, They just say, "Oh, this tweet says that I'm the best thing ever, and I'm 100% right." It's very much, the meme is, I've drawn me as the Chad and you as the Soy Jack, and that's very much what we see when it comes to, social media these days, and increasingly it's becoming more and more intertwined with real life. And I think it's interesting how Donald Trump's literally bringing a printout of a tweet to an interview, and it just goes to show you how increasingly I would argue that social media is much more the political battleground these days than real life is. And I think Trump's a big reason to blame for that. And that's my thought on that issue. Next, we have the Trump admin is rewriting disability eligibility rules, and the changes would fall disproportionately on some of Trump's most loyal supporters in red states. Most affected would be 50 to 60-year-olds without high school or college education and do coal mining, logging, and factory and construction work. Posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's cross-post from the Leopards Ate My Face subreddit. It looks like a tweet from Kyle Griffin. The Trump admin is rewriting disability eligibility rules. Changes would fall disproportionately, and then it says what the title says. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the government paying people on disability, but ultimately, I do think, if taxpayers want to voluntarily fund disability payments, I think there are worse things that they could fund. Personally, I would be more for a system of UBI than a disability or welfare state. But regardless, if Trump wants, just because you get disability money from the government doesn't mean you're entitled to it. You're entitled to no government benefits whatsoever, and that's important to always remember. The government can take away anything it gives you at any second, and that's why you always have to try and be as independent of the government as possible. Even if you do take some government benefits, that doesn't mean that you should try and be as least dependent on them as you can. It's interesting how a lot of the Trump people, or a lot of the anti-Trump people, say, "Oh, no kings," but then they go, "Yo, king, where's my food stamps?" And that just goes to show you that they're hypocrites. They want the state to do everything for them, but then they hate the state when it has the wrong the person has the wrong letter next to their name, even if they're still dependent on it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have people out here acting like it's night and day or something, and that's a post from Fast C Riviness 739, and that's a cross-post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit, and that's a guy in a red hat. It's a meme. It's a guy in a red hat giving thumbs up, saying votes for Trump's socialist policies, and it looks like the same guy, and he's pointing now without the hat, makes fun of people for voting for socialist policies in NYC. And yeah, personally, I would kind of agree with that. Zoran Mamdani, the socialist, he says he's a social democrat. I would say he's a socialist or even a communist. But, ultimately, I would say both parties are fully captured by the socialists at this point, both major parties, that is. And it just goes to show you how, increasingly, they move the goalposts on what socialism is. A lot of government programs these days would have been seen as socialist probably before FDR, but now it's been normalized, and that's very much how Republicans work. As Michael Mouse famously said, conservatives are just progressives driving the speed limit. A lot of Republicans these days are just Democrats from 10 years ago, and you can see with Trump, he used to be a Democrat until 2009, and he's still very much a 90s, 2000s Democrat, I would say, in regards to supporting social welfare programs and progressive policies, progressive economic policies. The only difference is, he's not into all the LGBTQ plus whatever other letters they've added as well stuff, and he's not into all the woke circle jerk in general. So of course, where that makes Reddit thinks he's literally Hitler, but he's far more like Democrat than I think a lot of Redditors would ever care to admit. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have masked figures grabbing people at their court hearings or not showing warrants for identification, posted by Helpful Feeding, and that's cross post from the NYC subreddit. This is what Brad Lender was protesting: masked figures grabbing people at their court hearings, not showing warrants for identification. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But ultimately, it just goes to show you if the state wants to do something, it can just by doing it wherever it wants to. If these people have the authority of the state, then they can do whatever they want to, and ultimately sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Maybe they're not even worth the state. Maybe they're just acting like they're worth the state, and that's something to think about as well. I saw a good video yesterday about it was a Reddit post from like a decade ago about a woman who was being contacted by a Department of Child Services agent about her pregnancy, and it turns out that the woman wasn't with the DCS at all. So ultimately, just because someone has the authority of the state or says they have the authority of the state doesn't mean that they have the authority of the state to do anything. And that's important to remember. It just because someone looks like they're in a position of authority or even is in a position of authority doesn't mean you have to bow down and do everything they say. To say otherwise would be status bootlicking, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Do Not Threaten Me If a Good Time, posted by Matt Ragnar OKXG, and that's cross-post from the Progressive HQ subreddit. House Speaker Johnson: if we lose the majority, they will try to end the Trump administration. He won't have 4 years, he'll have only 2, because they will move to impeach him, probably on the first day of the new Congress in January 2027, and try to systematically unwind all the important reforms that we've done. And yeah, personally, I don't know if you can really get Trump at this point. They've already tried 2 impeachments. I think if any an impeachment, even if is unlikely, because you need 3/5 of the Senate, and even if the Democrats win, I think every Senate seat in the next year, they'll still be like a vote or 2 short. And yeah, personally, I think Reddit's, of course, they're gonna say Orange Man's. They've been saying Orange Man's done any day now for the past decade. So eventually, he just started showing it out. Personally, if Trump gets impeached, then you just get Vance in there, and Reddit would just make him the new boogeyman. So I think what's going to happen is ultimately, unless some delusional Reddit or illness takes him out, Trump's going to serve the full term, and then Reddit will have coped like it did for the first term, and then I get eventually either another Republican will come in, and then they'll be the new boogeyman, or Reddit will move on to something else, which will probably just be circle jerking how good the next Democratic president is if they win the 2028 election. Then we have CA Prop 50, gerrymandering, and Republican reaction. And that's a cross post from the conservative subreddit posted by Labor Friendly. And that cross post says Newsom's Prop 50 vanity project overwhelmingly passes, with Dems looking to flip 5 congressional seats in 2026 midterms. And the OP added, I'm not a fan of extreme gerrymandering. I'm generally supportive of independent bodies doing districting, needing to support their decisions with documented reasoning, and somehow being responsible citizens, whether that's judicially or otherwise. But reading through these takes on the link post from Archon has me flabbergasted. The left are fascist, and we need to take the gloves off to do the news in red states since they started it. MFers CA did this in direct response, even at one point explicitly so, to Texas doing it, and it's temporary in California. The lack of self-awareness of what their own party is doing is so off-putting. I don't know how any person of intellectual and moral integrity can be part of the MAGA mob at this point. It's honestly disgusting to see. And I guess I would kind of agree with that. At least California did put up its partisan gerrymandering to a vote, I would say, unlike Texas, which kind of did try to do it without a proposition. But regardless, a lot of people are just going to justify whatever their party does. When Texas does extreme gerrymandering for the Republican Party, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. When California does the same thing for its party, for the Democrats, Reddit thinks it's the best thing ever. And that should go show you no values, only teams. This guy's going after how the MAGA mob has no values, but I would say a lot of the progressives these days have no values too. Because they always go over how gerrymandering is the worst thing ever, yet they almost unanimously supported Proposition 50 to bring gerrymandering to their state, but only it's for their party instead of the opposing party. That's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Truth, and that's a tweet from Thomas Massey. To avoid a repeat of last night's shellacking in the 2026 midterms, Republicans should quit covering for pedophiles, put America before Israel, put farmers before corporations, quit funding wars abroad, reduce spending to control inflation, quit attacking independent voices. And I would agree with all that. Personally, I think, the Republicans lacking in the off-year elections last night was kind of inevitable, especially with how many normies there are who believe whatever the TV tells them to. And, the TV just says orange man bad constantly, so that they're going to vote for the Democrats because they're the anti-orange man party. And, yeah, personally, I do think, Trump could be doing better, though. Like, as Massey says here, he's got to get out of Israel's pocket. Stop covering for Epstein, the Epstein files and all that stuff. But ultimately, I think he's just another tool of the regime, despite how he likes to market himself. Maybe someone like Thomas Massey could come in there and fix things. But even then, as I said in a previous episode, I personally think the United States is kind of unsalvageable at this point. We can only hope the balkanization is as peaceful as possible. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have a message to veterans everywhere about Tuesday, posted by Plasman 30, who said, "To all the veterans I know, I will continue on our Veterans Day as the day it should be. No man who got fake paperwork about bone sports to get out serving should be able to take this day away from you. Thank a veteran on Tuesday, and if you vote for this knucklehead, you should apologize to veterans everywhere." And I guess I would agree with that. Trump is very much, it's interesting. A lot of woke progressives hate the military. But, when Trump says, the military members are losers and suckers, they think it's the worst thing ever. It just goes to show you that, Reddit is very much hates veterans and thinks they're warmongers. I personally don't really care for the military-industrial complex, but at the very least, veterans, they're just, errand boys for the regime a lot of the time, and that's something that's important to remember as well. But, you gotta respect people for... Well, if you don't respect them, you shouldn't have to be forced to respect them. But, I personally do respect people for at least doing what they think is right and serving our country, even if, I personally don't agree with a lot of the decisions that the government makes about what to do with military. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And next we have Newsom posted a tweet in MAGA language they can understand, posted by Donald Key. And that's a cross post from the Newsom Massacre subreddit. Newsom posted this, and it's a thing from his Instagram account. And it looks like something from WWE about it's Trump is on one of the wrestlers, and then Newsom's face is on another of the wrestlers, and then Obama's face is on another of the wrestlers, and it looks like they're all beating up on Trump. And I think the Trump face wrestler, and they have Vance face on one of the other wrestlers who's down. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for all the social media circle jerking, but at the very least, I think that might be Hakeem Jeffries instead of Obama. Sorry about that. But regardless, I don't really care for the social media circle jerking. But ultimately, the Democrats are learning to play the game of how Trump does things, and if they want to circle Trump on social media, that's fine. But I do think it's going to contribute to the party's increasing magnification, which Gavin Newsom's trying to do it ironically currently, but I do think the Democratic Party is going to become unironically MAGA soon, pretty much, because what else do they have except for socialism or communism? They need something to appeal. Those are very unpopular among everyone except the youngest of the young people. And so yeah, they need some way to appeal to the older people. And I think the MAGA messaging might help with that. So that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.